Churcher, and welcome to the Game Grinder, and today I'm doing a very delayed tagged response video. Jason, my buddy from Corpse Flood Gaming, tagged me in a video 12 games that left an impact on me, and I believe his idea originally came from Chris, the old ass retro gamer, from a post that he made. So took me a little while to get around to this. I've kind of been on a 3-4-ish month plan of videos, and I've finally gotten to that point where I can squeeze this in. So again, apologize for the delay, but thank you very much for tagging me, of course. So I guess we will jump right into this. So I'm kind of going from old to newer to some extent, as I was just kind of figuring out how I was going to talk about these. So we're going to start at some of my earliest big impressions. So of course, a lot of us were largely influenced by some big hitters from Atari and NES and Super Nintendo, if you're around my age. So of course, you know, Super Mario Brothers, legendary game. It's a great game, but it's not something necessarily that was hugely significant. Sure, it was one of the first games that I played, but the format just wasn't exactly what I was hoping for. And I'm going to go with a couple very polarized opinions here for games that really affected me since my earliest days of gaming. A lot of people might not agree, but stick with me. There's some other cool mentions here, so give me a chance. And I'm not sure which one of these I played first, but I think it was this, and that is Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest for the NES. So, of course, you know, Super Mario Brothers, fantastic platformer. A lot of Nintendo games were really great platformers, but Simon's Quest was really that beginning of the Metroidvania genre, the platformer where you explored and your paths were blocked until you get like certain items, and kind of like some of the RPG-ish elements mixed in, some story and leveling and things like that. And when I played this game, it just blew me away. Absolutely. I still just absolutely adore this game. You know, one thing, too, that's very important to me when it comes to video games is also the soundtracks they make. They can make or break games sometimes for me. Music's a huge part of my life, so this is an amazing soundtrack, whether you like the game or not. You know, definitely left a huge impact on the Castlevania series. You know, of course, the first one, fantastic game. The third one, fantastic game. But it's really that beginning stages of the Metroidvania, which I love to this day. Games like, you know, Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, kind of the two other like pinnacles of the genre, among some other games. So then moving on to the next game that a lot of people might not agree with me, and that is going to be Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link. Now, this game in particular, you know, I do love this game. Actually, this and Castlevania are my two favorite games on the original NES. But, of course, the original Zelda, fantastic game. One of the most important adventure games to come out in those early years. But this one in particular, and this will get... someday I'm going to put together kind of a whole video really talking about it, but this one particularly because of the time that me and my dad spent playing it, really is just something that's stuck with me, you know, my entire life, pretty much since I was a little kid. You know how it goes, especially with us. You know, our parents were kind of late into the video games, and you know, a lot of times like things like platforming and combat can be a little tough at times, and especially when people are first getting their hands onto a video game system, you don't have all those extra skills. So essentially what would happen is I would play through the game, you know, my dad would watch or whatever, or I'd update him, and when I would go to school, he'd actually level up Link for me, which was great because, you know, I've never been big on grinding, and he enjoys grinding. So yeah, this has always been a game that's really stuck with me for that. And you know, again, it kind of built on the original platformer. You know, there could be more to it, you know, kind of leading into some, like, in a way, if you think about it, like early elements of an open world setting, you know, expanding into like later on, you know, RPGs, and a lot of current open world games can kind of find their roots in this. Alright, so then moving on to the next game, it's going to be Metal Gear for the NES. Not my favorite game in the series. It's definitely a game that I definitely enjoy, but started my love for a series that has gone up until this day. So when I originally saw this, you know, cool font, guy that looks just like Reese from Terminator, kind of looks like he's wearing like the gear from Aliens, the movie, and then a very cool mech on it. I was like, how could I not play that game? And it just turned out that I really enjoyed the game. You know, really interesting idea at the time with the detection, the stealth mechanics on the NES, which was pretty cool. Then fortunately I was able to get Snake's Revenge, which was the kind of unofficial sequel, I mean, to the actual series of the game, but it was sort of like a go ahead and make a sequel for the NES for the guys who, you know, ported this. And for the longest time, Snake's Revenge was one of my favorite games on the NES. It's still kind of, it's almost there, but I think at this point, now that I've been exposed to so many more NES games over the years, it's kind of got bumped down a little bit, but absolutely used to just love Snake's Revenge. And then, of course, the Metal Gear Solid series, one of my all-time favorite series ever, and without this game, who knows if I would have been, like, gearing to go when Metal Gear Solid came out on the PlayStation 1. So then, jumping up a gaming generation, I'm going to go with Final Fantasy II for the Super Nintendo. At this point, I had played Dragon Warrior and a couple other games that implemented some kind of RPG elements to it, but I actually had a family friend that I grew up with as I was a little kid, and he had some video game systems, and it was sometime after I got my Super Nintendo, which I don't remember exactly what year that was, but I want to say it was like maybe 93 or so, maybe 92. I think it was 93, but I can't remember exactly. But anyways, I went over to his house, and he was playing this game that I never saw before, and the music, like, first thing that caught my attention was like, holy crap, this music is so cool. And it's right when he kicked into the fight with the Four Fiends, which is a epic boss battle in Final Fantasy II with one of the coolest tracks in the whole game, and I was just mind blown. And like, I desperately was like, dude, let me borrow the game. He's like, oh no, I'm not gonna let you borrow the game. So eventually I went and picked up a copy of Final Fantasy III, and you know, even though I was looking for Final Fantasy II, I got Final Fantasy III, and it turned out to be one of my all-time favorite games. Really, just my love for JRPGs at that time just exploded. Introduced me to Squaresoft. You know, I was a Squaresoft fanboy, like, through and through, all through the Super Nintendo and the PlayStation, and really just kicked off my entire love for the JRPG genre. And it's an absolutely fantastic game as well. So then, jumping up another gaming generation to the PlayStation 1, of course, many of my all-time favorite games, you know, ended up being on there. You know, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Metal Gear Solid, you know, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy Tactics, Xenogears, like, just so many absolutely amazing PlayStation games. And a few games that came out on the PlayStation just really turned me on to new genres and new styles of games, and for the most part, these are series that I still, like, absolutely love to this day. So I originally played this on PC first at a friend's house, but I really got into it when I picked up my copy on the PlayStation 1 of Tomb Raider. I'd played games sort of like Prince of Persia, which I thought were pretty neat, and then you had kind of the 3D platforming mechanic, but Tomb Raider was just something special, something we had never really seen before. The puzzle exploration, the haunting atmosphere, the sense of wonder, the combat, the added sense of style that they just added into the game was just so fantastic. I've played through this game multiple times. The anniversary, which is technically a remake of the game, is absolutely fantastic. And like I said, I love the Tomb Raider series, and at this point I believe I have every single Tomb Raider game physically released. Maybe not all versions of the ports, but every single game, which I'll probably do a video about that at some point. So then another PlayStation 1 game that really kicked off a genre that I just absolutely adore still to this day is the original Resident Evil for the PlayStation 1. I originally played the director's cut myself, but I now have a green label, and I was like, hey, let's do the original version of the game. The director's cut is actually improved just a little bit, so if you haven't played Resident Evil, go with the director's cut, or even the remake for the GameCube, which is just fantastic, and I guess now on modern consoles with the HD remaster. But really, this is kind of like the true, like, explosion of survival horror. Tank controls, you know, a lot of people don't like tank controls. I still enjoy tank controls. Just something that was always kind of a knack to me. This and Silent Hill and Dino Crisis, and you know, even a lot of the later survival horror games, but really throwing in that unique story, the different aspects of the campaigns. You can play as Chris or Jill, the fantastically awful voice acting, and of course the idea that spawned in a massive series, which only until just, I would say more recently with the main installments of the series kind of went downhill, but there's a lot of hope for it now with 7. The Resident Evil Revelations games I really enjoy. So I'm hopeful for the future, and they're getting things back on track, because this is a series that really, as far as horror goes, is one of the best. You know, Resident Evil 2 is my favorite of the series, Resident Evil 3, Code Veronica, and even Resident Evil 4. And I love my horror games, so that is great. So then we're going to talk about a few very significant PC games, and these are things I've talked about before, so I'm not going to talk about them in any great depth. But probably the most impactful game, I would say, maybe because it's a game that I desire to see something like that again, which I don't ever think will happen again. It's a game that I really kind of say is the greatest gaming experience I ever opportunity to participate in, and that is Neverwinter Nights, which is... it's a WRPG, kind of think like Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age, isometric kind of gameplay based in the D&D universe. And it's not actually just the single-player story that is a fantastic game, but as I talked about this before, the really cool thing about Neverwinter Nights was the online component, where essentially they gave you a tool set that had all the resources of the game. You could add scripting, and essentially you could make your own game using the resources and host these games online. And what people did at first was people would just make kind of like combat arenas where players could make characters and fight each other. People started making story campaigns, all different sorts of things, but the ones in particular that I enjoyed were called persistent world servers. And what these were was people made actual regions in Faerun, the continent in the Forgotten Realms D&D universe, had all sorts of NPCs, and with that, administrators could basically act as live dungeon masters in the game, where they were able to manipulate the game as you were playing it, to add in story, to add in like random NPCs. And the server that I happened to play on sounds kind of nerdy, but it was actually really freaking cool. They were heavy role-playing enforced, so basically when you made a character and played on some of these servers, you'd have to create character descriptions and a backstory and kind of play the game and communicate with other people in character, which was so much fun, and there has never been an experience like that since. I've tried it in other games, and it was just the atmosphere and the openness and the sense of community that built in some of these servers, which were all, you know, their own things. None of them were connected in any way, shape, or form. And again, like I said, this is one of the gaming experiences that I hope will be something again. It's just, basically they gave us more content than they should have, and game companies don't do that anymore and don't provide that sort of thing without milking, you know, every dollar and cent. You know, they're going to charge you for hosting private servers, they're going to charge you DLC for different like tile sets and things like that. But who knows? I'm going to stay hopeful, but Neverwinter Nights, absolutely amazing, and I know there are still some servers going today, and if you've never played the game and you like games like Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age, you know, it's a BioWare classic as far as I'm concerned. It came out in 2002, you know, there's lots of add-ons you can get and mods to improve graphics and add more things to the game. It's just so damn good. So then on to another game that I really think kind of made a genre more than what it could be, and that is Half-Life. First-person shooter game that was very story-focused. Of course, at that point, there had been other story-focused first-person shooter games, but nothing like the level of Half-Life. Just the sense of atmosphere and what it turned into, you know, Half-Life 2 and the episodes, and unfortunately we may never see another iteration of this game again because the company has their head up their butts. All writers have basically left at this point, so who knows what's going to happen. But, you know, before this there were games like Doom and Wolfenstein, which I thought were fantastic games, but actually Star Wars Dark Forces, where they took a first-person shooter game, added this really interesting story, like really kind of like, oh wow, that's neat. You know, games like Doom were just kind of straightforward. You ran through, you had basic mission stuff, you know, not a whole lot to it. And me being a very story heavy, eccentric kind of person with my video games, what Half-Life did, I think, like, really changed the genre. Like, still to this day, a lot of lists, the Half-Life games make it really high, and it's very well deserved. So this next game's pretty awesome, and was really cool that at the time, I had a friend that had a PC. I didn't have a PC, but I had a Super Nintendo and a PlayStation. So essentially what I would do is I'd take my systems over to his place, he would play my consoles, and I would play his PC games. That's how I got to play games like Warcraft and Doom and X-Wing and TIE Fighter and Dark Forces. And then he got this game called Diablo, and it was amazing. And he also had the Hellfire expansion, which I have as well. But Diablo, legendary game, one of my all-time favorite game series. Diablo 2, of course, absolutely amazing. A lot of people don't give it the credit it deserves, but Diablo 3, I think, is just, maybe not story-wise, but the best in the series. Diablo 2, I think, gets the story, but once the Reaper of Souls came out for Diablo 3, I mean, that game is so much fun, so much to it. But it all starts here with Diablo. Isometric, ARPG kind of game, a little different concept where instead of exploring this world, you're just kind of going through this dungeon. Not an entirely original idea, but executed by Blizzard flawlessly as far as I'm concerned. And if you've never played Diablo, I would actually recommend getting PlayStation 1 version if you're not going to just play it by yourself, because you can actually play co-op very easily, which is a lot of fun. But the PC version is definitely the superior version, a lot more to it. And then of course, the Hellfire expansion adds some pretty neat stuff, even though unofficially an expansion for the game. And then the last PC game I'm going to talk here before I move on to the other things is another game in a genre where I'd played other games in the genre before. This game, I think, really just kind of took it to the next level. So of course you had games like Command & Conquer and Warcraft for the RTS genre, but I really think it's Starcraft that really kicked off the RTS genre into this epic scale story with unique gameplay mechanics. The Warcraft games had some pretty cool stories, but not on the scale of Starcraft. And then we saw its influence going to like Warcraft 3. And even though Command & Conquer really did it first, and I did enjoy the Command & Conquer series, just the style and how the story was told and the setting, I thought were a lot more interesting for Starcraft, and really kicked off my love for the RTS genre. Starcraft I'm still playing to this day. Or most recently, the third part of the Starcraft 2 series came out, which I loved. And it's another one of those series that I've just been playing these games for like 20 plus years and would love to continue to play them for another 20. Alright then, so if you have been following my channel for any amount of time, you should probably be able to guess what this pick is going to be. This is a more recent one that has left a huge impact on me. Kind of came out of nowhere with starting with a simple curiosity and a Steam advertisement for an upcoming game. After looking at it and going back and checking out the original and finding a very affordable reproduction, kicked off a love for one of the series that I just cannot stop talking about, and I'm sure a lot of people are tired of hearing about it, but until everybody checks it out, I'm going to keep doing so, and that is going to be Shantae for the Game Boy Color. So like I said, a few years back, a couple years ago actually, I saw an ad for the upcoming Shantae and the Pirate's Curse on Steam, and what I saw, I was like, whoa, that looks really cool. So I started doing some research, as I usually do, just to make sure that I'm playing games in order in a series, because that's just something I prefer to do. Found out it started on the Game Boy Color. Unfortunately, ridiculously expensive. Could always emulate, but I like having the physical stuff, so I decided to pick up a reproduction and kicked off my love for the series, as I said. The first one's almost like kind of like the odd one out, as it's really kind of like a Metroidvania game, very challenging, a lot more slow paced. But then, moving up to Risky's Revenge, which was like, whoa, this is a huge step in an awesome direction, to the pinnacle of what I think of the platforming genre, Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, and then, of course, most recently, Shantae Half Genie Hero. If you get a chance, and you haven't played any of the series, I'd recommend trying to start with this one. And if you can't do it, old graphics, slow gameplay, there's some mechanical things that haven't necessarily held up well, as people say, over time, then go with Risky's Revenge. But absolutely love the series. Cannot wait for the next DLC add-on for Half Genie Hero, and yes, Shantae, of course. So then the last game here is actually going to be a dishonorable mention. So I could have picked another game that I love, but at this point I think in one way or another I've talked about so many of the games I enjoy. I just want to give a nod on this game again, as it's a game that I rag on quite a bit, and not necessarily that I hate the game. I will admit that the things I say about this game are a little exaggerated to some extent, but it's a game that left a massive impact on me, and I'm just getting over at this point. So some of you might know what I'm talking about, and I've talked about it recently, but that is going to be Final Fantasy X. So the reason this is a dishonorable mention for me is this game actually, like, and people think this is ridiculous when it says, but it is what it is. It happened regardless. But Final Fantasy X ruined JRPGs for me. Going back to Final Fantasy II, I just couldn't have enough. Like, I loved JRPGs, I loved sprites, I loved the 16-bit music, I loved the simplicity of the visuals with the focus on these really unique and interesting stories. Things got shaken pretty hard with Final Fantasy VIII. I did not like Final Fantasy VIII. I tried so hard, just didn't like it. I think at that point the series really kind of started going off the rails with kind of these elements of suspension of disbelief. There's a lot of like kind of over the top things in the Final Fantasy games, but when they would throw things in there so freaking ridiculous where you have to ask, you know, why is that? They just kept doing what they do, and where they didn't explain things, because you don't necessarily need to explain every single detail, but I think it gets bogged down visually and in the world they're building when they start doing things like that. And coming from a lot of like very deep and interesting topics that a lot of these games covered and the struggles that the characters went through, I just felt like Final Fantasy X just dumbed down everything so far, especially with the story and the characters, and everything was just so ridiculous. Like, I just couldn't handle it. You know, 9 was a big step in the right direction, really got my hope back up, and then 10 was just this like kick when I was almost like already down. And I know a lot of people love this game, but I expected so much more. Maybe if this game was called something else, like, I would give it a pass, but at that point, being Final Fantasy, I just couldn't. I can't, although I have promised many friends at this point that someday I will sit down and give this game another go, but I really don't think my opinion is going to change. And the series is just never going to be the same. It's been up and down. You know, I know the MMOs are supposed to be really cool, 11 and 14. 12 I've heard good things about. I have 12, I haven't played it yet. 13, not going to do it. Have the games, you know, Final Fantasy Collection and all that. And 15 sounds kind of interesting, you know, hit or miss for some people. But as I said, this like ruined JRPGs for me. So anything released after 2003 or 2002, whenever this was released. So anything released after 2002, I pretty much haven't really played. Anything before this, I can easily go back to and play, but I just could not bring myself to play a JRPG after this game was released, and I've only just recently broken that with Tales of Berseria, which is a fantastic game and really showed me what I've been missing in the last 15 years of not playing more current gen JRPGs. And it's unfortunate, but the game like just broke me that hard. So hopefully this didn't go on too long, wasn't too rambly. There's more things I wanted to talk about, some of these stories, but I didn't want to make the video longer than it needed to be. So I hope you stuck around to the end and you enjoyed the little stories I've got here. So again, I want to give a huge thanks to Jason, Corpse Flood Gaming, for tagging me. I'm not going to tag anybody in this video, but if this is a topic you are interested in, I would love to hear what you have to say about it, and feel free to make a response, and I will definitely check it out. And I just want to say it is a lot of fun talking about some of more of my gaming experiences, and it's an idea that I think I'm going to try to include more on my channel in the upcoming months, I hope. But regardless, thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you next time on The Game Grinder.